Well, actually, I don't see this as a book about Sierra Leone. It happens to be set in Sierra Leone. It actually could be set anywhere where there has been repression and where people have failed to see that repression coming and haven't acted. So, in fact, the central character, Elias, his crime, if you could call it that, is actually a sin of omission rather than commission. It's not what he did, it's what he failed to do that is the thing that has come to haunt him later in life. The themes of the book are personal responsibility, how those things we do or don't do have a wider effect and may reverberate down the generations. Also love, obsession, madness, and mental health, post-traumatic stress disorder after a war like the war in Sierra Leone, where huge sectors of the population were affected by the war. At what point do you say this is a psychosis, or do you say actually this is life, pain is life? The character of Adrian existed before I wrote The Memory of Love. He actually appears in my previous novel Ancestor Stones, so I already knew that I was going to have a psychologist who was going to be part of the book. I really wanted that character, and I was still very interested in him and his failure really to understand the society he was in, where these deep and troubling and complex things had happened. I came across, when I was doing my research, I came across a report by Médecins Sans Frontières which claimed that 90% of the Sierra Leonean population was suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, this struck me as questionable, not in the sense that 90% of people have not been war affected, but that we were going to pathologise this and call it post-traumatic stress disorder. And I think also one has to think very hard about what life was like in Sierra Leone before the war and after the war. It was extremely hard in all those other times. So you also have to ask, what is an organisation like Médecins Sans Frontières, who are very well intentioned but essentially come from a Western perspective, what are they comparing it to? I think actually life in one of the poorest countries of the world is, by definition, according to that definition, traumatic. It's also how life is. Well, I try to portray a society pretty much as I find it. I did set it specifically in Sierra Leone, and I spent a lot of time there, and I saw that in the years after the war the population had gone from great hope and from giving a huge welcome to the arrival of Westerners, among them people who said they were there to help, that the population, the general population of Freetown, had really shifted their position, and there was quite a lot of anger, quite a lot of resentment towards the aid workers. I had on more than one occasion heard somebody in the street in Sierra Leone turn round to an aid worker and say, "Why don't you just go home?" People were angry, and they were angry because it became evident that the lifestyle of many of these aid workers served the aid workers far more than it served the average African. The cars, huge air-conditioned vehicles rushing through the streets of Freetown at high speed, bristling with antennae, people living in houses, young people in their 20s who are pretty much straight out of college, talking to village chiefs as though they were speaking to children, living in houses with servants. At one point when I was in Sierra Leone, my previous career was as a journalist, and I had decided to write a piece for one of the newspapers. I asked every single person that I could find, who I was interviewing, one question: can you point me to an aid project that you think has really worked? Now, I asked ministers, and I asked peasants, and I asked middle-class Africans, I asked doctors, I asked absolutely everybody, and every single one, including the ministers, sat there and went, no. Not one. And this was after 5 or 6 years, and the aid agencies were actually moving en masse to Liberia, which of course was where the aid dollar had gone, so they were all following the aid dollar to Liberia. So I really noticed in that time this enormous change in how, and it changed a lot about how I perceived Western aid in Africa. So that is reflected through Kai. He's a doctor, he meets Adrian, he has sympathy with Adrian personally, he likes him, but Kai also does have these feelings about how people like Adrian, or what people like Adrian are really in the country to do. Is it for the country or is it for Adrian?